Hurricane Michael cut a destructive swath from Florida through the Carolinas. The Florida Panhandle in particular was left reeling in its wake. AM Best has just released a briefing on Hurricane Michael, and here to discuss some of the impacts this storm could have on the insurance industry are David Blades, Senior Research Analyst, and Chris Draghi, Senior Financial Analyst. And David, now that the hurricane has passed, can you talk to us a little bit about how insurers are servicing policyholders?
All right. Well, definitely in the days leading up to the storm, what insurers did is they readied themselves to be able to respond for their policyholders as quickly as possible after the storm had hit. So what we're seeing now from companies is that insurers are getting catastrophe adjusters in the area as soon as it's safe to do so, to be able to respond to their policyholders and get to them in terms of taking claim notifications. There are also some of them engaging third-party adjusters who may be located near the area, and again, all of that done with respect to expeditiously getting to their policyholders and helping them file their claims and get the information from them as quickly as possible. In addition, companies are really striving to let their policyholders know the different ways that they can file their claims or get their notifications to the companies. We are calling 24-hour claim centers, accessing the company website, utilizing company apps, via their tablets or smartphones, in addition to hopefully coming to maybe temporary locations that the company may have set up in the area so they can come in and do make these notifications in person. So companies are really trying a number of different ways to get to their policyholders and again, as expeditiously as possible, service them and get the information from them so that they can hopefully indemnify them as quickly as possible.
Can you talk to us a little bit about how risk modeling may have impacted insurers' preparations for this hurricane?
Well, definitely. What we've seen, and AM Best has relationships with some of the leading risk modelers that we get training on the risk model so that we know when we're engaging our companies, kind of the questions to ask in terms of how the risk modeling is helping them prepare. And what we see is that the refinements in risk modeling, the improvements in the granularity of these models is helping companies prepare better in terms of understanding their book of business and understanding the potential for losses in various scenarios that they may suffer from their overall book of business in these to these different events. So what it's doing, it's helping companies prepare more, and again, that'll allow them to to respond even better for their policyholders based on, again, the improvements and the refinements to these risk models.
Right, David, and if I could add, you bring to a good point that it does certainly help in the reinsurance purchase and how they're going to structure their reinsurance programs. But also, they're able to run these models ahead of the storm and see where the track is going to be and help identify certain concentrations where they'll maybe need to focus sending their adjusters so that they can respond quicker post-event.
Now, Chris, the report notes that rated insurers were able to minimize their exposure in the Panhandle area. What about the newer insurers, the so-called takeout insurers? They've been relatively untested. Can you talk to us about that dynamic?
First and foremost, the Panhandle statement was not meant to be all-inclusive. More of a comment to just illustrate the different risk appetites that are out there that will undoubtedly influence Hurricane Michael's effect on the carriers out there, both rated and non-rated. Then further to your point with the takeout or the newer companies, now these companies were tested last year with Hurricane Irma. So post that event, lessons were learned and then different areas were brought to light that needed certain revisions such as reinsurance protection or different concentration managements, but others also proved effective with their mitigation strategies. Overall, the point to be made is that there are definitely a unique collection of companies within that state with their own unique strategies, both old and new. And these different strategies will affect the affordability and availability of insurance within the market. Market participants will continue to face challenges such as hurricanes that will impact their ability to dynamically compete in the environment.
Now that the hurricane has passed, could Florida's problems with assignments of benefits worsen as a result?
The potential is certainly there. With rain and wind that befell the state, there's certainly a potential for accumulation of non-flood water claims to come through. That said, many of the rated carriers have made comprehensive measures to combat the potential impact. These measures include changing policy language, rate increases, different risk appetites or making the underlying guidelines stricter. But with that said, you know, the underlying conditions, the underlying market conditions that are present within Florida that have fostered the escalation of these losses is still ever present, and you know, they'll need to be addressed one way or another, most likely with regulatory action.
David, we don't know yet what industry losses will be as a result of this hurricane, but how will primary insurers fare?
Well, like you said, John, it's definitely too early to tell what overall industry losses will be. But I think it's safe to say that from a standpoint of insured and economic losses, I think, you know, ultimately the losses will probably be a little bit higher than those initial estimates, given how the storm intensified in the 24 to 36 hours before making landfall. But from the standpoint of primary insurers first, you know, wind-related losses will definitely dominate in terms of the losses that come out from Hurricane Michael. I think, you know, that's what we'll see in terms of taking on the greatest number of claims from that standpoint. But from AM Best's perspective, we believe the rated, affected insurance companies are definitely sufficiently capitalized and have appropriate reinsurance programs in place to withstand the losses that they're going to absorb from Hurricane Michael. From the reinsurance standpoint, we definitely think that the reinsurers will definitely absorb some, you know, fair share of the losses, and we think, you know, even from a comparison standpoint, we think they'll probably absorb more of the losses from Hurricane Michael than we saw from Hurricane Florence that recently impacted the Carolinas. But even with that being the case, we think that the losses that the reinsurers will absorb, they'll still be within their catastrophe budgets and within their overall loss estimates. So we think that's something that we definitely anticipate. We also think a share of the losses will be absorbed by either retrocessionaires or the ILS funds that provided some of the capital for you know, the catastrophe bonds that have been put in place. So we think that'll also have an impact in terms of the losses that'll be absorbed on the reinsurance side. And we think from an overall perspective, you know, when it's all said and done, for the property casualty industry, this will prove to be a manageable earnings event as opposed to an event that impacts the capitalization of the property casualty industry in the aggregate.
David Blades, Chris Draghi, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
You're welcome, John.
You can find the full report online at ambest.com. For AM Best TV, I'm John Weber.